And the less you speak, the more you believe that you have nothing worth saying. And that belief creates that pattern of staying quiet, which then confirms the belief that you have nothing worth saying. And so that cost of staying silent keeps you in that very painful, it is really, really painful self-doubt loop. Welcome to Sensitive and Self-Assured. Before we get to today's topic, let me tell you how I know you are in the right place. You feel everything, and at some point you started believing that was the problem. My name is Alyssa, a highly sensitive woman who stopped trying to fix herself and started learning to trust herself instead. This podcast is for the woman who edits herself before she speaks, loses herself in relationships, and still quietly wonders if there is something simply just wrong with her. Nothing is wrong with you. Your sensitivity isn't a problem to fix, and self-assurance isn't out of reach. They belong together, and this is where the two meet. It is July 2026, and we are in the throes of summer in Indiana, and I'm actually recording this during a holiday weekend. We celebrate 4th of July here in Indiana, and it's a really big one, or here in the United States, and it's a really big one this year because it's the 250th anniversary of America. And, lots of people gathering and pool parties and barbecues and fireworks and all of those things. And it got me to thinking about this idea of taking time off of work and summer vacations and just vacations in general. And that is an absolutely necessary part of life and just being a human and taking time off of work and to refresh and regenerate and to have really awesome experiences. I absolutely love to travel and experiencing other cultures and foods and all of those things. And so all of that is incredibly valuable and wonderful. And at the same time, it got me to thinking about how work and like the way that we show up in work can contribute to or be a symptom of kind of how we edit ourselves before we speak, and the energy drain that comes from that makes vacations more of like a necessity because we just need a break versus like this really exciting thing that we get to enjoy. And I've talked about how editing ourselves in social settings can be draining, and it absolutely is. And if you have not listened to that episode, I highly recommend that you go back and take a listen to episode 67, because I think it would be really valuable to have some awareness about some ways that not speaking up drains your energy. And today I want to talk about that same concept of not speaking up, but specifically in the workplace and what it's costing you. So I want you to imagine that you are sitting in a team meeting, wherever it is that you work, and something comes up and you have a thought, you have a question, an idea, a perspective, and then almost like instinctually, your filter kicks in and you start asking yourself, like, what if this is a dumb question? What if I should already know the answer to this? What if I say the wrong thing and I upset someone? What if I disappoint my supervisor? All of those questions that our brains start asking before we even realize that they are asking us. And then you say nothing and you just sit with it, and the meeting moves on. And meanwhile, you are having a very physical response. Your heart is racing. Maybe you are becoming flush. Your voice, if you had spoken, would have been shaky. And there is a part of you that is actually very relieved that you didn't say anything. You're so glad that you kept quiet. But then there is also this part of you that leaves that meeting feeling very invisible and feeling discouraged and like you didn't show up as the professional you know yourself to be. And I see this happening all the time. And today I want to talk about what this looked like for me, because I lived this and I know that I'm not the only one. And I know what it's like to go quiet in those meetings, even when you have something to say. And I know what it's like to soften your idea and to give all sorts of like prefaces and really choosing your words carefully on the off chance that you do say something that by the time it actually comes out, it has kind of lost its pungency, maybe is the word that I want. And so it kind of gets dismissed and overlooked. Or I know what it's like to be sitting there asking myself, should I already know this? And then ultimately deciding not to ask and like waiting for that perfect moment to speak and then watching that pass by. And I also know what it's like, just like we talked about in those social settings, that for those of us who are highly sensitive women, that the room itself is louder than it looks. You're reading everyone's facial expressions and their energy, and you're anticipating their reactions, and you're monitoring tone, and all of that is happening at the same time you are trying to formulate a thought. And that cognitive and emotional overload is immense. It absolutely is. And it is immense before you have ever even said a word, before you've even opened your mouth. And ultimately, you decide not to speak, but it's not necessarily an active decision. It's like 10 or 20 small decisions before that you made so fast before you ever even processed that you had made a decision at all. So for me, it looked pretty much exactly like that. I would sit in team meetings and I would be quiet. And it wasn't because I didn't have something to offer. It was because my fear of all of those things. What if my supervisor didn't like the idea? What if it was a quote unquote dumb question? What if I should already know this? What if I upset someone? The fear of all of those what ifs was so much louder than the idea or the thought-provoking question that I had to offer. And it wasn't just mental. My heart was racing. I could feel the flush creeping in. I could, I've talked about this before. I could feel the chemicals coursing through my body. If I had spoken, I know for certain my voice would have been shaky, and those in that meeting would have sensed my nervousness or anxiousness. I sometimes physically was shaking, and I was doing my best to not let that be external. So internally, it felt like everything inside my body was shaking. And thank goodness for virtual meetings, because that was a little bit easier to hide than in-person meetings. And just putting forth so much effort trying to hold it together on the outside while I was managing a really big storm inside. And in that effort to hold it together and hiding all of those symptoms and suppressing the thought, like it was just taking such a toll. And then I would leave those meetings in so much discomfort and feeling very undervalued and unheard. Ironically, I was not saying a word and still I felt unheard. The supervisor was frustrated at times because I wasn't contributing more, which then fed kind of my self-doubt and I'm not very good at this and I should probably do something else, which then just made the next meeting that much harder to show up, and it made it that much harder to speak up. And this loop was just almost unbearable, honestly. Like I felt myself kind of crumbling under the weight of all of it. And from a team approach and feeling like all of this pressure, um I had this kind of inability, not that I didn't have the ability, but like it felt like an inability to ask clarifying questions of people, my teammates, my supervisors, so that I was left like searching for all of this information on my own. And the perfectionist that I still am, but like really was at that time, it eventually would kind of override that, and I would seek out answers or reach out to certain teammates that I felt like I could trust. And that kind of became unavoidable. I had to, because I couldn't find the answers myself, or I was in so much self-doubt that I kind of needed some external validation. But all of that combined cost me a lot of time and energy, and I made mistakes because of it as well. And I share this because, again, I know that I am not the only one who has felt that way in meetings and then after that, and felt like I was disappearing and was really struggling because I knew I had a lot of expertise to contribute, but I just didn't feel safe enough for a variety of meetings, or for a variety of reasons. And I see this coming up with my clients too, and kind of untangling that very physical, visceral response from the risk itself. And our nervous system just simply doesn't know the difference until we learn how to tell the difference. And kind of distinguishing between, like, I might say something that's going to be a little bit awkward versus I am in real danger here. And kind of learning to discern those two was really powerful for me. And I see it being really powerful for my clients. And so I want to talk about specifically like what editing yourself in a professional setting is costing you. It is costing you visibility and advancement, because while you are being quiet, someone else is speaking up and being seen and heard. And so you're kind of staying in the same position and not advancing, not being promoted while your colleagues are. And it is not because you are less capable. It is because your capability is invisible. And then we start to self-doubt and question, am I really capable? Do I really have all of this knowledge and expertise that I think I do? And you kind of get stuck in that loop, when the truth is you have so much to offer, but you're not getting the promotion in the way that your colleagues are because you're quiet. The other thing that it's costing is a relationship with your supervisor. So often we are going through life feeling very misunderstood, right? And the same is true in the workplace. That silence can be misread, misunderstood, misinterpreted. And so for you, while it feels like self-protection, your supervisor could be misreading that as disengagement. And then when it comes time for an evaluation, they might say things like, well, I mean, you don't really seem very invested in this company and the work that we're doing here, or you're not an active contributor of this team, and that's concerning. Whatever that may look like, right? It is very far from your truth of why you are quiet, but it goes misinterpreted or misunderstood. That self-doubt spiral that you find yourself in, that every time you leave a meeting where you have stayed silent, it just kind of feeds the next one. And the less you speak, the more you believe that you have nothing worth saying. And that belief creates that pattern of staying quiet, which then confirms the belief that you have nothing worth saying. And so that cost of staying silent keeps you in that very painful, it is really, really painful self-doubt loop. And then the other thing that it is costing you is kind of that physical and emotional residue and energy depletion, because all of that anxiety and the physical things that you are experiencing and the energy that it drains in the room, it also goes home with you. It sits with you at dinner. It wakes you up at 2 a.m. And we have talked about those 2 a.m. conversations before. And so it perpetuates long after the meeting has ended. And this is not a character flaw. I know I have mentioned that before. It's not a confidence problem that you were born with. It is this learned pattern. And it very likely started much earlier than this job, this team, this meeting. That pattern has been learned, and it can be unlearned. And when I'm talking with my clients, most often we uncover that it happened, whatever the thing was that has kind of contributed to the real need to stay silent. It was maybe a classroom setting when you were growing up, or maybe a dinner table conversation where you got shut down, or some relationship where speaking up really cost you something, and you just learned that it was safer to stay quiet. And so we start working with those parts so that those parts begin to feel heard, and then you begin to feel safe to speak up and be heard now. So what it looks like when you start speaking up, for me, it was not perfect at all. It was very imperfect and kind of awkward and not graceful and sometimes messy and very scary. But something started shifting for me, and there was some relief that came from actually saying the words out loud. And there was a little boost of confidence when what I said or what I contributed or the question I asked was received, because I started showcasing my expertise. Those physical symptoms, they did not disappear. And to be perfectly honest, sometimes they still show up in spaces where I'm speaking. It probably looks like to some that I don't have any nerves ever. And it just kind of depends on the setting. When I think about when I first started this podcast, I was nervous every time I sat down to the microphone, and that has gotten better, but there are still situations where I get nervous when I'm interviewing a guest, or if I have a speaking engagement, right? So sometimes my voice still wants to shake and my heart rate increases and I can feel those chemicals coursing through my veins, but I manage it better. It passes faster, and there is just this sense of empowerment kind of after the fact that feels really, really good to have used my voice and to speak up. And it also felt really good to be recognized and valued for what I brought to the team. And eventually that led to a promotion. And it wasn't really because I became a different person. I was still the same person in that work setting with the same expertise, but I just finally let people see what it is that I had in my brain. I said it out loud. And it is truly one of my favorite moments in a client session when a client says something out loud that she's never said anywhere else, and nothing bad happens. And she gets to feel that feeling for the very first time in her body and have that very first piece of evidence, that proof for her nervous system that she can say something out loud and survive it. And then the next time it's a little bit easier, and the next time it's a little bit easier. And it it's just such an incredible feeling. So if you find yourself often being the quietest person in a professional setting where you know that you have a lot of expertise to offer, I say this with so much love. Your silence is not humility. It isn't even necessarily professionalism. It is a pattern that is keeping you from being known and valued and promoted for exactly who you are. And you have so much to contribute in your work environment. And I know that to be true because I know how hard you have worked, because I know what it's like as a highly sensitive woman to not want to make mistakes. And so you work very, very hard to have all of the knowledge. And so I know you do. And you deserve to take up the space that you have most definitely earned. And if you felt very seen while I was, or while you were listening to this episode, and this felt like a very familiar experience for you, maybe not necessarily just in your workplace meetings, but kind of that loop that is underneath of staying quiet and what that feels like, then this is the exact pattern that I work with my clients in our one-on-one coaching sessions. And it's not about becoming louder. It's not about becoming more confident overnight. It's about finding where that pattern started and building trust so that you can own your own voice and begin to share it with your closest friends, with your colleagues, with whomever you want, but you no longer have to stay silent. And if you are curious about what that could look like, I would love to talk with you and, have a conversation in a consultation and just see what that shift could look like for you. So you can click the link in the show notes to book that consultation and just explore what could be possible if you started using your voice. Because you were never meant to stay silent and abandon yourself just to get through life. You were meant to live it sensitive and self-assured. Until next time, take care.